important, because jobs will lead people out of that poverty. And we've heard the Minister of Labour speak to that as well, just as recent as now. The other thing, Mr. Speaker, that I want to make perfectly clear is that not only do the silos have to be broken down and staff have to buy into this, I believe that any government that sits on that side of the House has to buy in to the fact that poverty will always be an issue in some respect, and that any government of any stripe that sits on that side of the House must adhere to and improve upon any strategy that we put forth in the coming months, in the coming years. I believe that is our responsibility. Mr. Speaker, we've seen many great examples from all around the world in Ireland, and I know the Minister has had her department study that. We've had presentations come to this province in recent months from individuals that have brought forth change in Newfoundland. We have in our own, up east, we have Quebec that, you know, when I look at Quebec, Mr. Speaker, I think of one of the things that people have always said about the Olympic Games and how long it took Quebec to pay down the Olympic Games. And what we don't talk about is some of the best social programs that the province of Quebec has, some of the best childcare programs that Quebec has, and they've done that and instituted that all the while we're paying down that debt. They recognized that they wanted a certain standard for their citizens to live. Now, in a recent visit to Montreal this past summer, Mr. Speaker, I can tell you that they still today have work to do. There are still people sleeping in the parks in and around Old Montreal, and they're trying to address that. They've come up with a little solution. All the vacant meters, they're going to open up those meters, Mr. Speaker, and allow people in the surrounding communities to put money into those meters, and that will go towards the poor. But when we can walk in our own country and in our own province and see people living on the street, Mr. Speaker, this is why we are here. We are here to help those who are weakest, those who are marginalized. And Mr. Speaker, I think that we are on to a good thing, because finally, like the hot topic that the environment has become, poverty now has crossed over all borders. We can no longer tuck it away, no longer acknowledge it. It has moved into affluent communities. We've seen that with the rising rates in crime, Mr. Speaker. I'm encouraged by the Minister's comment regarding the local churches and charitable organizations. And I know that there are changes coming with policy when we've asked individuals to go out and approach charities first. And I know that's coming. Mr. Speaker, I've stated many times that I assist at our local food bank. What we do at our local food bank, though, is we have individuals that belong and volunteer there that not only give out food to those that are in need, they help guide them through the system, help transfer them over into programs and get them set on the right paths so that maybe someday they can come back and volunteer. I encourage a collaborative effort, and I would like to think that all parties will play and participate in that process. I do want to say that when this takes place, if this bill goes through this House, that my next concern will be the concern as to how fast it gets proclaimed. And to me, Mr. Speaker, that's saying a whole lot. Because if history repeats itself, as we've seen with many of the pieces of legislation that have gone through this House, the delay in having things proclaimed, I stand here today and state to you that the NDP party would love to see this implemented as fast as possible. Let's not waste time in delayed consultations and reports. We have organizations that have come to us over the years and presented us with things and processes that can be put in place today that can improve the lives of those who need it most in our province. And I would encourage the government to take those steps, to take those ideas, those very ideas that we know and we acknowledge can be implemented today and have a great effect on people's lives, and continue on to that consultation. But this piece of legislation has to be proclaimed. Because if we stand here and we say that this is an important piece and we don't follow through, Mr. Speaker, what that says to the rest of Nova Scotians is that we truly don't care. I want to end by saying one thing, Mr. Speaker. Maybe a word of advice, a word of criticism. And it's not a personal attack. But each and every one of us in this House that stands in their place and speaks or speaks to media knows full well that a consistent message must be sent to all Nova Scotians. All Nova Scotians that are affected by every piece of legislation that comes through this House, comes before us, comes before you, Mr. Speaker. There must be a consistent message sent by all our leaders in our communities and especially at the provincial level. People will respect us for taking that stance. But if we merely change our minds on a whim, I think we are being dishonest to those individuals that really respect us for the job that we do here. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The honourable member for Digby and Elm.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to stand here today, too, to speak on Bill 94, the Poverty Reduction Bill, that was submitted by my colleague, the member from Annapolis, and I'm glad he did submit this bill because I believe that the member from Annapolis, like myself, knows poverty, and probably a lot of us in this House may know poverty. And I believe to correct poverty, you've got to know what poverty is. How can you correct something that you don't know what it is? My friend, my member from Annapolis, brought up many years ago in a family of 17 people, and probably only enough potatoes in the pot to feed 15 of them. So I'd say that's one little form of poverty. I had 9 in my family, Mr. Speaker, that not quite as many as my friend from Annapolis had, but there was 9 children there, and some days there was only enough potatoes in the pot for 7 or 8 of us. So you wanted to get to the table when supper was called. And I know a little bit about poverty. And my friend who submitted this bill does too. So what is poverty? You know, that's one little form, not enough food in the pot at night to eat. There's many different kinds of poverty. You know, I think lack of education is a big problem in poverty. I was taught, I haven't got a real high education in school, but when I was 15 years old, I set out on the waters because I was taught that if you give a person a fish, you can feed him for a day. If you teach him to fish, you can feed him for life. And that goes into anything that you do. You can hand out somebody a few bucks on the street, whether he's squeegeeing, whether he's just panhandling through the streets. All you're doing is helping him maybe to get a little hungrier if it's not enough in his hand for the full meal. These people with no fault of their own are in this position because maybe they never had a parent like I did to teach me how to catch those fish to feed me for my life. So I do feel sorry for these people. And in this workshop that's put together to make this work, the poverty in this province, and there is a lot of poverty. I know there is. I see it every day. And I'm not talking about panhandlers. I'm talking about people that live in shacks in my riding that are too proud to come out to even tell you they're hungry. I know of seniors that are living on pensions that are too proud to come out and ask for a little more help to help fill their oil barrels. They're receiving government pensions that's not quite enough to do it. There's all kinds of poverty out there, you know. So it's not just teaching our young people how to catch those fish to feed for life. It's also we've got to take care of the older ones that maybe never had that chance. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I know that this bill is a good bill, and this bill can be worked on by the working group that's put together, and hopefully it will be a good working group from around the province. And I hope some of us that know poverty may be able to have input into that. And I believe we could do great things. And I think we can correct the problem of poverty in this province, because I know, and I was taught also not only to fish, I was also taught that for every problem there is a solution. So thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure to join in the debate of Bill number 94 this evening. I've had the opportunity to hear some of the submissions with respect to this bill already, and I believe my colleagues have already indicated that we're going to be supporting the passage of this bill, and look forward to the working group getting underway and composing, for the benefit of the province, recommendations with respect to a poverty reduction strategy. I want to raise a couple of things just that I think have to be considered, maybe have been mentioned already, and some which I'm sure have not, and that is just exactly how the committee is going to be funded, whether or not it's going to have the ability to actually carry out its mandate, whether those resources are going to be handed to the committee so that they can operate independently, Mr. Speaker. Will they have the appropriate administrative facilities to be able to do the work? Will they have a research capacity? And where is that funding going to come from? In order to make sure that the working group actually has the wherewithal to do the very important job that it's being asked to do. Now, it may be that those resources will be allocated departmentally. Perhaps people will be seconded. I'm not sure what the government has in mind with respect to this. I noticed that the bill says that there will be an appropriation for the of the funds that are required for the implementation of the Act. And I don't know, frankly, at this point, Mr. Speaker, whether or not that means that they are expecting that the bill will not be fully implemented until the next budget year. And therefore, there would be an appropriation that would come in the spring through the budget, which would be used to facilitate the working of the group, or whether or not, in the meantime, individual departments will have funds allocated in order to make sure that whatever resources are required to make the working group effective will be allocated. Now, these are questions I raise because I don't know whether or not the members opposite have thought about them, or indeed whether or not that this is just, I suppose, to say that this is to ensure that there is an understanding that when we strike a committee like this and we ask them to do a job, that there is an expectation and a requirement that they be properly resourced to do the job. Because other than that, Mr. Speaker, it handicaps the committee before they even get underway. And I want to talk just for a second, and I know that there's a lot of talk about poverty reduction as a societal goal, and certainly it has become the lexicon of discussion in the public these days to talk about poverty reduction. But I don't want to lose, and I reflect back on the many years that I have been involved in various groups, Mr. Speaker. When I started out in law school, working at the Housing Legal Aid Clinic during the law school session, I was the resource person for the Victoria Road Tenants Association at the time, and we worked to try and organize the tenants in Scotia Court and in the housing development in downtown Dartmouth in order to facilitate their ability to be able to stand up for some of the changes that were required with respect to their own living conditions. And Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to take the time this evening because I want this bill to get fully through, but I can tell you that in the work that I did with those groups in those days, there were circumstances that people were living under and demands that were being made on people, which if we looked even this short time since then back on, you know, we would be shocked to think that the government allowed these kinds of conditions to exist. And I think, unfortunately, if we were to canvass closely some of the current facilities that belong, we could find examples where we would not be happy with the standards that exist in some of those facilities. But we've talked about poverty reduction, but I don't want to lose sight of the fact that the discussion that we used to have, the language that we used to use, talked about breaking the cycle of poverty, and we don't hear that as much anymore. And I don't want it to get lost because we have to fundamentally be concerned with lifting people out of poverty, allowing them to achieve, allowing them to break that cycle not only for themselves but for their families, Mr. Speaker. So we can't lose sight of the fact that poverty is a very, very complex thing. It is as individual as the people who suffer in poverty. It is a result of individual circumstance, whether it's income or health, whether it's physical health or mental health. It is affected by things like education, by opportunity. It is a very, very complex subject that we speak on. So we have to be prepared to understand that it is going to take a complex answer, that there are many things that are going to have to go into the mix, many things that are going to have to change in our society, including attitudes, that in order to truly break the cycle of poverty. And at this point, and I'm not trying to be obstinate or controversial, but Mr. Speaker, soon before this House, we will bring the bill with respect to amendments to the Motor Vehicle Act. And I have to say that I am not satisfied that fining people who are homeless, fining people who are on the street because of disabilities, who are there because of addictions. I do not believe that that is a poverty reduction strategy. And I do not believe that this House ought to be supporting it. And we have said this on numerous occasions, and we tried to get law amendments to make the appropriate changes to that particular bill. And I know that the Speaker is soon going to say to talk on this bill and not on that bill, so we will get the opportunity, Mr. Speaker. But in the context of this bill, I think we must be dissatisfied that this is a substitute, some kind of a substitute in the government's mind for actually taking action with respect to these matters. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I want to talk about what happens after the bill is passed, and that is the question of implementation, because all of us have seen reports and recommendations, and we have seen the product of fine work that has been done on behalf of legislators here, on behalf of community groups. There have been many, many studies done and recommendations made that simply have not been implemented. And a bill without implementation is just words, Mr. Speaker. So let's make sure that as we all stand up here tonight to support this bill and to talk about its importance, that we not forget, in the end, those recommendations have to be implemented. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank you for the opportunity to join this debate tonight, and I look forward to the passage of this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. The honourable member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's important. This bill is very important to many people, and we all, as MLAs, see people in our are offices that have particular problems with their financial affairs, mainly because they haven't had the opportunity to get a good job, or there's been some kind of illness in the family, or whatever the circumstances are. And it's important as legislators that we work towards eliminating poverty in our communities. And you look at a lot of seniors. I have a lot of seniors in my area that years ago, when there wasn't pensions available, really didn't enable them to get the income they need today to survive. And that's been a very, very serious problem. And I've spoken about that in this legislature many times. We've seen seniors that actually are looking after their homes and looking after themselves very well, and almost impossible situation, but they're doing it very well. And those people I give a tremendous amount of credit to, because they can manage money beyond anyone I've ever seen. And they deserve a lot of credit for doing that. And if they had more money, they'd be able to do more things and ensure that instead of making a decision this week whether they're going to buy oil to make sure they keep warm or to have food on the table, that decision wouldn't have to be made. And in this province, that decision should never have to be made by anybody. Unfortunately, that's the reality of where we are. We see a lot of difficulties in other countries and appeals for funds to go to other countries where there's severe poverty and situations. And I feel we've got to do some more things here in our own country to help here as well as other countries, to ensure that we have people that have a good job if they're working age, if it's a single mother with a couple of children, that there's the systems put in place to ensure that that mother can either continue her education so she can get a well-paid job, or have the daycare that she needs to go take training, whatever the situation may be. And every situation is different. Every single person is different. And some people I've seen come into my office, they simply need a way to get to a job interview, and with some other help, some minor help, just minor things, they can get a job and look after themselves and look after their family. And I haven't talked to anyone that doesn't want to do that. You know, there's always a view by some individuals that people that are on community services don't want to work. And I've seen a lot of people in my office and a lot of people in our community that indeed do want to work. But if you don't give them the skills, the opportunity to get the skills and the education, there's no way they can ever get a job that will pay them enough so they can look after their family and themselves. And these are good people. These aren't people that have had other problems. They're people that just didn't get the opportunity for an education, or their family situation at the time. Maybe they had to go to work at a very early age and couldn't continue their education, whatever the situation was. And as I say, every individual is different. Every individual family is different. And you see some of the things that go on in the community and see the benefits from it. And there's one thing that I will praise the government for is the legislation they put forward to qualify tradespeople that have been working in the trade for years and years and have the practical knowledge, but have never got the document that says indeed you can do that work. And without that document, it means that you can't join the union and get the highly paid, coveted jobs that involves, or go to work at a business that's not union and get the top rate in their facility and the benefits that go with that. But they're working in maybe the same company with a lot less income, and it means that their family suffers and their family lives in poverty. And we see so many families like that struggle every day to just do the basic things in life. And that should not be the case here in Nova Scotia. It definitely should not be the case. And we cannot tolerate it. And I want to thank our leader, Stephen McNeil. He's been a leader on this right from the beginning, and really, really positive approach to this whole situation as we move forward. A lot of people say they're going to do things. I think this is very progressive legislation, which will start us on the road. This is a long, hard road we're going to be on. But we have to be there. We have to be persistent. We have to continue to talk to the community and the people that are affected and see what they need and work with them to ensure that those tools are in place, those opportunities are in place, and that all the things that are necessary to help a family do what they want to do and make sure that they can look after themselves, and also that their children have opportunities that perhaps they never had when they were growing up. And I know in my generation there was so many families that really pushed us to go to school, worked with us to ensure we had the the things that we needed to go to school. And I'm sure that some days that in all our families at that time, there was difficulties doing that, but the family always made that happen. And I think we've got to give our families in the past a lot of credit for what they did achieve with very little to work with. And some of those people today are seniors, and they still have very little to work with, but they live in pride, and they're there doing incredibly good things with the small amount of income they do have. And those people need a lot of credit. We could learn from them, and we need to learn from them in two ways. Number one, how they manage their affairs, which I think is outstanding, and also learn from them not to make those mistakes again and give the next generations opportunities to ensure that when they retire or as they're working their working life, they have enough income to look after their families and to make sure that our province is a stronger place. Because we have better educated workforce here, people that aren't struggling every day. It means our whole economy moves forward and we all win. And that is the only way that the province can move forward. So if you give somebody an education and a good job that they deserve and they've worked hard to get, they will give you benefits back. And I think we have to start doing that. And I think we need to do that one person, one family at a time. And very, very soon, we will have the situation in place that we won't have to discuss this anymore, because we'll have the problem underway to get resolved long term. We'll never totally fix it. There's no way to ever totally fix it. But if we can eliminate most of the problem and get a plan in place to help people when people fall into that trap, and it can be for many reasons, many reasons that could happen, there's the support there for the families to move forward and get out of that cycle. With those few words, Mr. Speaker, I'll take my place. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to have an opportunity to rise in my place and make a few remarks on Bill 94. Mr. Speaker, this is an act. It's entitled An Act to Establish a Poverty Reduction Strategy Working Group in Nova Scotia. And the purpose of the act is that a working group will be appointed to make recommendations concerning a strategy for the reduction of poverty in the province. Mr. Speaker, to be honest with you, I have very mixed feelings about this act. And first of all, let me be clear, I certainly support, not only in principle, but the fulfillment of the terms of this legislation. But Mr. Speaker, frankly, my support is tempered with some considerable frustration at the lack of action on many fronts where we already have had lots of talk but very little action with respect to reducing poverty in the province of Nova Scotia. And maybe, Mr. Speaker, maybe I feel a little jaded and cynical because as a member of the social work profession and someone who has worked for many years with low-income families and people living in poverty and struggling to overcome the barriers and the challenges that they face as a result of living in poverty. I've seen many work groups come and go, many reports, fine reports developed and not implemented or barely implemented. And I have always fear that we just repeat the processes of the past and the problems of the past. Mr. Speaker, as I was listening to the debate here today, I was thinking about the former director of social planning for the city of Halifax, the old city of Halifax, Harold Kroll. And Harold is well known in the social planning community, not only in the province of Nova Scotia, but across the province, or across the country, as somebody who, when he worked in the social planning department at City Hall, had a real passion for social development. And he was an innovator. He did many things out of that department that had been untried in Nova Scotia. For example, the social planning department set up a unit where they purchased a rent-a-wreck franchise. They took people who were on social assistance with mechanical skills. They were employed fixing up cars and then renting the cars and providing a retail service in the community. And they supported and they assisted people from short-term poverty and being out of the labor force back into the labor force with marketable skills. And this was an initiative under I think a group called HRDA, a component of the social planning department, that really attempted to make a difference in terms of moving people from short-term poverty and maybe even longer-term poverty back on their feet and into the labor market and self-sufficiency. Harold Kroll, when he was the director of social planning, initiated a task force on poverty reduction for the city of Halifax. It was chaired by Dr. Fred Ween, a professor at the School of Social Work at Dalhousie, someone who I had the privilege of working for as a research assistant a number of years ago. And all of these little work groups were set up to look at a variety of issues, including, adult education and helping adults get their high school diplomas, and housing and homelessness. I remember the incredible coming together of all of these working groups to report back. Stephen Lewis came to town, was the keynote speaker at a conference, and it was a very exciting process, and one, I think at the time I may have been working at Legal Aid, the Dalhousie Legal Aid Clinic in the north end of Halifax. And it was, something that we really invested a lot of time into. The unfortunate outcome of this really creative and intense process, however, was a report that really went nowhere because the political will to implement the recommendations of all of these working groups simply did not exist. The mayor and the council that received the report weren't around long enough to implement the report, and the political will that supported the work of this initiative dissipated with the loss of those members in the political arena. And Mr. Speaker, that was certainly a frustrating experience for many of us who worked so hard on this initiative. And it causes me pause, to think about how you build a process that then has to be carried through to action. And this, I would suggest, is actually a weakness in the legislation that's in front of us. It talks about the players who should be involved. It talks about the departments of government that should be consulted, but it does not hold accountable the implementation of any strategy or any recommendations that are developed. And Mr. Speaker, frankly, without that piece being in the bill, this bill runs the very real possibility of a very interesting process being developed with some good recommendations that there's no requirement that they be implemented. There's no time frame which they would be implemented. And once again, it becomes kind of an exercise in theory without any impact in practice. And Mr. Speaker, that concerns me. Mr. Speaker, the member who introduced this bill, the member for Annapolis, introduced a bill previously in November of '06, introduced Bill 74. And I had an opportunity to look at and contrast Bill 74 with Bill 94 to try to get a sense of what the changes might be, if any, and to try to understand how this bill has developed. Now, I would suggest, Mr. Speaker, there are some improvements in the bill that's been tabled, but also there seems to be some differences that I'm not quite understanding of, that I would very much appreciate more information around. In the previous bill that the minister introduced, or that the member from Annapolis introduced, there were other groups that were included for the committee, for the working group, that have been left off the list in this new bill, Mr. Speaker. So I want to make mention of those groups, and I want to ask if we have an opportunity in the debate that maybe some explanation be given for why various groups were left out of the bill that's in front of us here. Women's Centers Connect are the women's centers across the province. The first bill introduced by the member for Annapolis had Women's Centers Connect in them, but they've been left out of the second version. The United Way was listed in the first bill. It's been left off the second bill. The Nova Scotia Association of Social Workers was included in the first bill. It's been left out of the second bill. MESA, the Metropolitan Immigrant Settlement Association, were in the first version, or the first bill. They're not here in the second bill. The Halifax Coalition Against Poverty was listed in the first bill. They're not here in the second bill. The Affordable Energy Coalition was in the first bill. They're not here in the second bill. The Black Community Advocates Association were in the first bill. They're not in the second bill. And the Nova Scotia Government and General Employees Union were in the first bill. They're not in the second bill, as well as a community health board was in the first bill. It's not in the second bill. Now, one of the things I have noticed in the second bill that was not in the first bill, which I think is very laudable, is that a group representing Aboriginal interests have been added to the second bill. It wasn't in the first bill, and I think that's an important addition. I think that the groups, if I'm not mistaken, that are listed in Bill 94 are all the groups that the government have had their first consultation meeting with, that occurred several weeks ago now, and so I understand this is what's reflected, but the Minister of Labour has said that it's not a final list, that the minister has the discretion to add in other groups, and I would encourage very much the minister to consider the groups that were on the list of organizations, representatives, to be consulted and included in the first Liberal bill, to be very much involved in the process I think they bring very, very important and useful perspectives. The Nova Scotia Government Employees Union, for example, Mr. Speaker, as we well know, many of the frontline workers in the Department of Community Services and Child Welfare and the Income Support Office are members of that union. It's difficult for workers to involve themselves in a consultation process sometimes where they want to be critical of government policy, but they fear for any kind of discipline. And we have seen child welfare workers come to this legislature in the past critical of government policy and have disciplinary letters placed on their file. So I think we really, to have, for example, the Government Employees Union able to be represented in that process would be a very important,
Order, please.
process.
Chatter's getting a little high.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I know that my colleague from Dartmouth South Portland Valley made reference to the concern she had with respect to gender parity or the participation of women in this process. And I too, Mr. Speaker, share those concerns. I think the reality is that there are more women who either live in poverty or are responsible for the well-being of other people living in poverty than any other group in our society. And those perspectives really do need to be advanced, which is why I'm somewhat disappointed that the bill that we currently have in front of us doesn't have Women's Centers Connect as part of the working group specifically outlined in the legislation. As we all know, the women's centers across the province do a fantastic job, but not only do they do a fantastic job, they have developed like a wealth of expertise with respect to single-parent families, low-income households, women who work but who continue to be poor, either single women or women with children or women in two-parent households that struggle. So I would really hate to see the perspective of the women's centers not represented, and I'm somewhat surprised that they've been left off the list. The United Way as well, Mr. Speaker, the United Way, as we know, has a tremendously long history of working with community services organizations and charities across the province. And they bring a wealth of expertise and experience and innovation in terms of outcomes and measurements. They've been doing some of the cutting-edge work in terms of outcome measurements of any of the community service-based organizations. And it's a pity to not have them represented on the working group. Mr. Speaker, as the member of the official opposition said when he spoke, the issue of poverty is a very complicated one. It's not easy to define what poverty is, and there is so much disagreement about what the measurements actually should be. Mr. Speaker, the Fraser Institute, for example, seems to promote a standard that if you're hungry without a home or without basic necessities, that should be our measurement and nothing more. And I remember a former minister of community services one time in this province saying there were no hungry children in Nova Scotia, and pretty much implying that there was no poverty in Nova Scotia. But Mr. Speaker, this is one measurement of poverty that is considered absolute poverty. You're absolutely poor if you have no food, if you have no home, if you're cold and you can't adequately clothe yourself. It's kind of a third world standard. Now, Mr. Speaker, we live in one of the most wealthy countries on the planet. We're a member of the G8, and I think, Mr. Speaker, we can do better than looking at absolute poverty for our citizens. We really need to be thinking about what the social scientists call relative poverty. You don't take people who are poor in Nova Scotia and measure them against people living in an underdeveloped country and say, well, you know, if you were in Africa or if you were in Haiti, you'd be living in a tar paper shack and you wouldn't have enough to eat. You'd only be able to feed yourself for 2.5 weeks of the month. And therefore, because relative to Haiti, you're not living in that kind of poverty, then you're not poor. That's comparing people in a very wealthy country to people in a very poor country. And that is, in a way, the Fraser Institute's measurement. They want to have an absolute measurement of poverty that puts everybody on the globe at the same level, and then you compare our citizens against that standard, and of course, in a developing country, we're never going to fall that far behind. Mr. Speaker, I would submit, and many people in the social work field would say, you have to compare people in our country to people in our country. You compare people living in poverty against people who are your neighbors, people who are living in your community, and you say that's the standard where you determine what the average kind of lifestyle and opportunity would be, and then you say how many people have the ability to hit those average kinds of standards versus people who have no hope on an income level, on an educational level, on an opportunity level, ever get there. It's the idea of relative poverty. Poverty is something you measure relative to the people who surround you in your community and in your province and indeed in your country. As a Canadian citizen, people should be entitled to a certain basic standard of living that we shouldn't fall below. The Minister of Labour earlier in the debate made reference to a report that came out today, Mr. Speaker, about a growing gap between the rich and the poor. I haven't seen the report, but I'm not surprised because it wouldn't be the first report in recent times that has talked about the growing disparity inside Canada. It's something that the social scientists tend to call the hollowing out of the middle class. What it means, Mr. Speaker, is that more and more people who once enjoyed middle class or a middle income standard of living, more of those people are falling into the lower income categories. And the disparity at the same time grows because on the other end, there are more of the double high income families that we see, particularly in professional groups. We've seen a huge loss of manufacturing jobs in this country, a growth in service sector, low income relative to manufacturing jobs, low income and low benefits relative to the jobs we used to have. So it's not surprising that there has been a growing gap. But one of the things that the people at Stats Canada have been talking about for a bit, not too loudly, mind you, but for a bit, is that the people who are on the bottom, the people who have the lowest incomes in our country, have really stagnated. Their incomes have completely stagnated for probably 10 or 12 years. And so it isn't only that they've been poor, their poverty is getting worse. They themselves are not a growing group. The very bottom percentile or in the income distribution in the country, anything that I've read, doesn't show that that very bottom group is actually growing, but what is growing is the depth of their poverty. So the quality of their lives has tended to really deteriorate. And many of these people live in our communities, in the emergency shelters, in the slum rooming houses, on the streets, and there has been so little attention paid to these groups. They are not a group that have very powerful advocates, very strong voices, or any political clout. And it's something that bothers me a great deal, having emergency shelters like the Turning Point in my constituency. And I have to say, the new executive director of Metro Turning Point, who I believe has met with the Minister of Labour. I don't think he's been able to meet with the Minister of Community Services, although he would like to, is a phenomenal individual working with the people who are the most disadvantaged in our community. And these people have fallen further and further behind. Mr. Speaker, there are so many aspects to what a poverty strategy has to touch on. It's not just about trying to find some agreement about what poverty is and how we measure it, but also then what are the causes? How do you establish a cause and effect for poverty? And there are about as many theories about why people are poor as there are people who live in poverty. Certainly, earlier in the debate, I think the Minister of Community Services talked about children who live in poverty. And Mr. Speaker, children aren't poor on their own. Children live in poverty because their parents live in poverty. They mostly live in poverty because they're the children of single mothers living in poverty with one income, a low income, and Mr. Speaker, even with a good education, these women often live in poverty because they can't afford the high costs of childcare. And we still have a situation where we don't have a national child care program. We have a federal government who's ideologically opposed to the social provision of child care by government. We have a federal government who scuttled a national child care plan and replaced it with a $100 a month payment to families. Who on earth can find childcare for $100 a month? I'd like to meet that person. I've yet to meet that person. I'm sure we're all looking to see if that person exists. But children who live in poverty, a great deal could be done if we had some action on the child care front, and if we had a government, a federal government, who believed in a national child care plan, and we certainly don't have that. Mr. Speaker, we have a list of organizations in front of us to make up this working group, but the list doesn't necessarily reflect geographic concerns. And I would like to say that rural poverty and urban poverty are not the same thing. I think the member from Digby Annapolis made some excellent points and speaks very well on behalf of his part of the world. And that's what he was pointing out, Mr. Speaker. He was pointing out that in rural Nova Scotia, the circumstances of people who live in poverty are different than the circumstances that people living in poverty in the metropolitan area face. In the metropolitan area, we have more institutional community-based services and social services, where in the rural areas there are probably more informal supports in a community, but it's not enough. And I remember when I lived in the Annapolis Valley for a short period of time, Mr. Speaker, I was very, very shocked and very surprised. I had grown up in rural Nova Scotia, but lived for many, many years in Halifax. And moving back to the rural area and seeing the extent to which poverty that reflected circumstances that I would attribute to an economy in the 1940s or 50s still existed in rural Nova Scotia. People who could only get employment on a very seasonal basis, in very low-wage occupations, picking strawberries, picking apples, working in agriculture for a very, very short period of time, back-breaking work, and not work that someone who wasn't physically strong and capable could very easily do. And you know, we all know that people who live in poverty with inadequate nutrition often have many of the health problems that go with those circumstances. I remember talking to a farmer in the Delhaven area, actually on a research project that I was working on, and he said, you know, when he talked about the difficulty that he and the farmers in the area had in terms of harvesting their crops, and the fact that the local social service office would literally disentitle people on social assistance during the productive months of the agricultural season so that they would have to go work on farms. I remember him saying that, you know, I've had people come and they're not well enough to be able to do this work. It's backbreaking work, and the work that was mechanized, he wasn't putting an untrained, unskilled worker on a piece of equipment that cost him $250,000 or more. And who could blame him? You know, who could blame him? You can't just pluck somebody off of the welfare rolls and thrust them into an agricultural environment and expect that they're going to know how to handle the produce, how to work the farm equipment. It just ain't that simple. And so the kinds of policy solutions for the problems that we have with respect to poverty are very, very complicated. Mr. Speaker, one of the largest groups of people living in our province in poverty are people with disabilities. And it's pretty disgraceful, Mr. Speaker, what happens to people who develop a disability or become disabled. People who receive Canada Pension disability are prohibited from working more than a small amount of hours and earning a small amount of money. I think it's something like $4,000 a year they're able to earn annually. These are people who don't have a drug plan. Now, I don't know too many people who have disabilities that don't require some form of prescription drugs. Yet, CPP doesn't provide them with a drug plan. They're not allowed to work a little bit, even if they can do some kind of work where their disability can be accommodated, to the extent that they can actually afford drugs. This province, along with every other province in the country and the federal government, were supposed to set up a working group to actually work at this and try to resolve this issue. And I've seen no action and no activity around that. In fact, I've had an exchange of correspondence with both the federal and the provincial ministers with respect to this, and really can't find out what's happening. And all I know is that for people in my constituency on CPP in those positions, they live very, very limited kinds of lifestyles because they have inadequate income and inadequate opportunity to be able to do anything to boost their income. So, Mr. Speaker, there are many things we could talk about in this debate, and I know that this is an issue that will no doubt come back here to this legislature on occasion, and I look forward to having an opportunity to talk more when those opportunities present themselves. In closing, Mr. Speaker, I would like to remind the members that this Friday, Feed Nova Scotia will be doing their annual fundraising event in conjunction with CBC near the CBC building. Mr. Speaker, ironically, it will be groups like Feed Nova Scotia, who I totally support, who in the future will be able to fundraise in the streets to provide charity to the very people who we won't permit to do that without fining them. And it just strikes me as being a little two-faced, Mr. Speaker. I don't know if that's a parliamentary term or not, borderline. But I think it sort of does express my feeling about this bill and a bill that we'll be debating fairly shortly, Bill 7, that has the provisions that would prevent people who are poor. And you know, Mr. Speaker, I want to say I understand. I'm not somebody who would ever in my wildest dreams argue that poor people should have to beg. I think I spent too long in the trenches working with people who are poor and people who wanted to be able to be self-sufficient, people who wanted to get out of poverty, to suggest for one moment that begging is an answer to the poverty they live in. It isn't. It never was and it never will be. But Mr. Speaker, how we approach people, how we make people who are poor deviant by bringing in legislation that labels in some way their behavior as they attempt to deal with the realities of their lives concerns me very much. And I'm not really all that interested in having more groups sort of fall into the purview of legislation that labels people's behavior as deviant in some way when they're simply victimized by an inadequate social policy in our country. So, Mr. Speaker, with those few remarks on the bill, I take my place and I look forward to hearing from other members of the Assembly.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton Nova.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I too am glad to rise today on Bill 94, an act to establish a poverty reduction strategy working group in Nova Scotia. I really enjoy the title of that. I'm just wondering what the working group in Nova Scotia, what they're going to study. When I worked in my former job as executive director of the Whitney Pier Youth Club, and I prepared many a breakfasts for kids on the way to school. I'm just wondering if this study is going to feed those kids on the way to school. I wonder if this study is going to feed those kids at dinner time. Those are some of the things that I wonder about this study. I wonder about recommendations. I don't know. I remember the first forum on poverty in January the 12th and 13th, and I sat through that, and I'm not going to say who was there and who wasn't there, Mr. Speaker, and what went on at that forum, but those recommendations were given to the Standing Committee on Community Services. We have hundreds of recommendations that were given from these groups that came, and so many groups with so many issues about poverty in the province of Nova Scotia. You know, from transition groups, and I don't see transition groups on the new list. And actually, in this new bill, I don't see the Department of Education. The Department of Education was on the former list, but I don't see the Department of Education on this new list. I don't know if it was an omission or what it was, but you know, I thought that we for many years, my colleague from when I first got elected, who actually I'm standing in his place here today, from Dartmouth North, was a very good advocate for poverty and people living with disabilities, the Honourable Jerry Pye. And it's a pleasure that I say his name, because he was I idolized Jerry for his advocacy for people with disabilities. Jerry Pye was one of the finest gentlemen that I've ever sat in this legislature to bring those up with people with disabilities living in poverty. And even today, I can still hear his click in the back of my ear as I stand in my place today and listen to Jerry talk about all these issues, and realize that, and one of Jerry's main issues was around the housing, and I am the housing critic for the opposition, and talk about housing issues and affordable housing. And I've stood in my place many times in question periods and late debate and talked about housing issues. But there's another issue, like living at home in Whitney Pier, and people with disabilities or people with physical or mental disabilities come into your office and saying, you know, I've applied for housing, the Island Housing Authority and Community Services, but I get a letter back saying that I'm not eligible because I'm under the age of 58. Because you're under the age of 58, there's no actually, I guess, policy for them to fit in with the housing. 58 years of age and above, you know, is seniors housing, but, you know, 58 to go down below, they have nowhere. So they said, you know, being you're not in that age bracket, you know, you'll be put on a list. And I have constituents of mine who have been on a list for almost 3 years. People with disabilities, mental disabilities, and physical disabilities are on a list. And I'll give you an example of a lady by the name of Patricia Lewis, who has many problems, mental problems and other problems, and disabled, and living in a rat-infested house, and comes to my office and tells me that, you know, as a member of the Legislative Assembly, I mean, I'm living in these horrible conditions. I'm after killing a couple of rodents in my apartment. So what can I do as an advocate on behalf of her? Is my job as an advocacy for people like that? And I know when I call the Department of Community Services and tell them that, you know, these are things that you have to do as an MLA. And you call, I remember getting an email back when I first got elected saying that I was no longer allowed to speak to community services workers, that I had to speak to the supervisor. And I wondered why. And then go to appeals and go to community service appeals. I go to community service appeals on a regular basis. I go to EI appeals. I go to the Canada Pension appeals. As an MLA, those are things other people say, well, why do you do those things? I do those things because I find that this job is an advocate. I am an advocate, you know, for those people. I wonder why, like, and that we have on one hand of this bill being introduced, Bill 94, and yet we have another bill before the legislature, which are, I'm confused in the sense that we're going to say that, you know, the underlying issue with young people is young people are out squeegeeing cars, and young people are out doing this and causing problems. So I'm just wondering, like, what is the underlying issue? Like, I mean, they're living in poverty. They have no other way to get themselves out of poverty. So we're going to fine them. I mean, is that not putting them back in the poverty? Where are they going to get the money to pay those fines? Where are they going to get the money to do those things? I mean, and pay those issues? So they're going to be put in jail? I mean, I think, you know, the biggest thing that we've had lately, and I've heard this 1,000 times, is that our jails are becoming our institutions. People that are mentally disabled, people that have paranoid schizophrenics, and other people that are on medication come off their medication, they're in jail. We are filling our jails with people that actually need affordable housing, people that need help, people that need the help to stay on the program. We are filling our jails. We're institutionalizing, which we got rid of back years ago, but yet we continue today as I stand in my place to fill our jails. Is this what's going to happen to these young people? They're going to be fined and put in jail. Is that the proper thing to do? I don't think that's the proper thing to do. We have one hand, we're introducing a reduction strategy working group. I mean, how many of the reduction strategy working group, you know, are they going to recommend that and are we going to accept that, or when are they going to implement? There's no timelines on this. You know, when this working group comes back to the legislature and reports back, there's no timeline. When are they going to implement this? We've had hundreds and hundreds of recommendations. We live this as MLAs, and we live this in our offices when people call, and we understand what they're going through. You know, we understand, but yet we sit here again and we say, okay. And it was 2003 when I was first elected to the legislature, and I remember back in 1989 or 90 when the UN passed a resolution saying that, you know, we're going to get rid of child poverty by the year 2000. Here it is, 2007, soon to be 2008. Have we got rid of child poverty? One in every 5 children in the province of Nova Scotia live in poverty. I mean, this recommendation is going to get those children off poverty? Is this group going to get those children off poverty? I mean, is this, you know, this is a good step forward. But I mean, when are they going to be implemented? When is the timelines on this? This is the problems that I have. You know, I'm just wondering, you know, the recommendations, are they going to feed kids? Are they going to help kids in the street? And the policies and community services for children between the ages of 16, 17, and 18, they're archaic. They're absolutely archaic. I mean, I visited 3 young people living in the woods earlier this year. And somebody said, what are you doing in the middle of the woods behind the old city dump in Sydney? Visiting 3 young people that lived in a tent. I said, did you go to I went to community services, but I don't have an address, so I can't get any help. I'm living in a tent. So I called the supervisor. I said, living in a tent. And my CA said, geez, you know, I should go with you because I'm afraid some. I said, you don't have to come with me. I'm going to go up there. And I went behind the old city dump and I walked down and I'm hollering the kids' names in the woods. And these 3 young people come out of the woods, ages 17, 18, and 16. One was accepted into Nova Scotia Community College. And I said, well, I can't get any help because I don't have an address. So I called the department and said, don't have an address. Well, I had to go through and try to find them a place. I had to call landlords and see if I could get them a place. If I could get a landlord to agree that they would have the place, then the department would pay for that and then pay the damn. It took 3 months to get those kids living in the woods. I felt ashamed of myself as a member of the Legislative Assembly that I couldn't do anything. I went out there every week for a week and a half, and my CA was saying, geez, you know, what are you doing? And the smell out there. I mean, they were living in a tent. They lived in one tent, and they had the food in the other tent. And then one day I went out there to visit them, and the young lad told me that somebody had stolen his bike. So he couldn't even get to get his bike. They had stolen his bike. And the neighborhood out there was getting mad at him because they were walking back and forth. So finally, I got her some help, and she got a job as a dishwasher in a restaurant. So that was one step. The young lad, I got him to move in with his brother. I mean, these are things that I see every day on a daily basis in my constituency. And I imagine everybody else sees that in their constituencies in Cape Breton, from one end of this province to the other. You know, these are actual facts. You know, we have people living in poverty in this province. And again, we go back to say, okay, we're going to study the problem. We're going to make recommendations on the problem. But how many of these studies and recommendations are going to actually feed and help these young people? Are we going to change the policy that they have in the department for ages 16, 17, and 18? These are the ones that are falling through the cracks. You understand as an MLA how, Mr. Speaker, how you have to go and say, okay, well, you can get help for them, yeah. Well, we're going to call their aunt, their uncle, their grandmother, their great-grandfather to see if they'll take them in and make sure that their father's living in Alberta, so he doesn't want them. The mother's doesn't want them because she's on drugs. So, I mean, you have to prove that fact to the department to make sure, okay, they have no other avenue for them to get them out of, you know, where they're at. They have no other avenue. So you, as an MLA, you have to say, okay, everything's done. So find somebody to look after them, get them a boarding house. Get them somebody to board with them. You have grandparents that are raising children today and trying to raise children, and they go to the department and they say, you know, can I get boarding? Well, you're the grandparent, you're not going to get boarding. So then you go and you have to get them to sign a sworn document so they can get the child tax credit. It takes 3 or 4 months to get the child tax credit, so you do that as an advocate, I mean, to get that in. I just recently had a case where the lady had a baby and had not received a child tax credit and was living on her community services department and had to write to the Department of Canada Revenue to get her child tax credit. Just Monday just passed. She ended up getting $2,100 a day. It was owed to her, but yet the bureaucracy of getting it, and young people don't understand. So they come to your office with all kinds of matters in poverty. I remember my colleague Jerry Pye talking about seniors living in poverty. How many seniors in the province? And that number is only going to actually double as the baby boomers get older, and that population growth in the senior aspect of it. How many of those people are going to be, living in poverty? And I think there was a stat in Cape Breton that I forget, over 60% of the seniors living in Cape Breton pay more than 30% of their income for housing. I mean, that's so they're doing without. They're doing without housing, Mr. Speaker. I mean, there's so many faces of poverty. I'm only touching a little bit on the faces of poverty, but there's so many faces of poverty. From all the youth groups that work along from Bay St. Lawrence, and my colleague from Cape Breton, Victoria Lakes would very well know the little community up in Bay St. Lawrence and the youth center that they have, and what they're trying to do to deal with some of these issues of poverty. I mean, what are the underlying causes of poverty? Is it drug abuse? Is it alcohol? Is it, So when I looked at this and I realized the Department of Education was not on the new group, and I just wanted to, so we had a strategy here. For many years, I always said that when I spoke at different issues in youth things, that we always had to know community services, justice, education, Department of Health had to be involved in a young fella. The old saying, it takes a village to raise a child. So, I mean, and I've seen over the years of working in my past job about how one department didn't know what the other one is doing. I mean, is that a recommendation? Or, I mean, what's going to happen is the money. Give me an example of the Whitney Pier Youth Club. It provides very many, actually, excellent programs to young people in the province of Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. So what they do is they live from grant to grant. How many nonprofit organizations in this province live from grant to grant? Well, you have the St. Vincent de Paul, you have the Salvation Army, you have the Whitney Pier, you have all of these organizations that they don't actually have the core funding to staff it, but they live from grant to grant. They spend most of their time writing proposals, but what they're doing is providing services that we as a government should be providing. But yet we depend on the church groups, we depend on the nonprofit organizations to provide those services, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there's so many issues to deal with this poverty. I'm glad that this poverty reduction is going to go forward. I'm happy in that sense, but I mean, we do know the recommendations in this province, and we do know, all of us as MLAs know the issues around poverty. So, Mr. Speaker, with that, I'm going to sit down in my place and finish up. But I mean, I could go on and stand in my place for an hour tonight and talk about this, Mr. Speaker, and talk about issues that we see each and every day. But I'll look forward to seeing this bill go forward, and look forward to being at law amendments and see what recommendations come in. Thank you.
The Honourable the Minister of Health on an introduction.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And just for a moment, I'd like to rise for a couple of seconds to make an introduction of some individuals that have been in our gallery for some time now, waiting for the debate on the Dental Hygienist Act. And I just wanted to thank them for paying attention today, and I've asked them to stand and receive the warm welcome of the House. Terry Mitchell from the Legislative Committee of the Nova Scotia Dental Hygienists Association, as well as Patricia Grant as well from the Legislative Committee, and Patricia's husband, who's here to lend support as well. So if they can give the warm welcome of the House.
If I recognize the Honourable, the Leader of the Liberal Party, it'll be to close debate. The Honourable.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank all members of the House for the comments that they made on Bill 94, and I want to move second reading of Bill 94, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
Is the House ready for the question? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? Motion is carried.
Bill 94, entitled An Act to Establish a Poverty Reduction Strategy Working Group in Nova Scotia.
Order that the bill be referred to the Committee on Private and Local Bills. No? Law amendments, I'm sorry. It's referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable, the Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would you please call private and local bills for second reading?
private and local bills for second reading.
Please call Bill number 83, the Halifax Regional Water Commission Act.
Bill number 83, the Halifax Regional Water Commission Act. The member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased to rise today to bring forward Bill 83, which is an act respecting the Halifax Regional Water Commission. In May of this year, Mr. Speaker, the Halifax Regional Council approved the transfer of responsibility for HRM's wastewater and stormwater assets to the Halifax Regional Water Commission, and that transfer was unanimously approved by the Water Commission Board later in the month of May. So this bill comes to us with the full endorsement of both those bodies. It creates here in Nova Scotia the first regulated water and wastewater utility in Canada. And the purpose behind this and really the compelling reason to move this forward is the aging infrastructure in HRM and the fact that there's a great deal of work that needs to be done both in new infrastructure, for example, the wastewater treatment that we have coming forward, and also the old sewer lines and water lines that need to be maintained and upgraded. And it was felt that under this new structure, there would be greater financial sustainability and a better ability to meet environmental standards and upgrades and look after the infrastructure of HRM. This piece of legislation adds flexibility to the Commission to do things such as issue securities, bonds and debentures for the purchase of funding and financing the infrastructure upgrades. And there's greater flexibility for the new Commission rather than for HRM to do this as it goes forward. The Commission is managed and governed by a board, which is laid out in the Act as well. It includes the Mayor, 3 members of Council, 3 residents of HRM, and 1 member of HRM staff. And in terms of accountability, Mr. Speaker, I think it's important to note that the rates that will be charged are set through the Utility and Review Board as we go forward, that's a very important aspect of this. And I think what we're looking at here is a bill that strengthens the ability of HRM to continue to provide the services, not just of what they have today, but even to upgrade and meet higher environmental standards as we go forward. And with those few words of explanation, I'd like to move second reading of Bill 83, the Halifax Regional Water Commission Act.
Honourable the Minister of Health Promotion and Protection.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to spend a few moments of the House's time to speak specifically about Bill number 83, a bill which I have some familiarity with. However, I would point out that I have more familiarity with the Water Commission itself, Mr. Speaker. I happened to serve on the very first Halifax Regional Water Commission in 1995 and subsequently through until 1999. As a member of Council, I was Council's appointed member to sit on that commission and to help direct Halifax Regional Municipality as we move forward with the provision of water for our citizens in Halifax Regional Municipality. During my time on the commission, we saw some very substantial improvements to our water system here in Halifax, including the commissioning of the Lake Major water treatment plant that provides water for all of the Dartmouth side of this municipality. As well, we saw the expansion of services into communities like Beaverbank and Middle and Upper Sackville, Hammonds Plains. We saw other communities receive improvements to their existing infrastructure, Mr. Speaker, during that period of time. And since then, Halifax Regional Municipality and the Water Commission have moved forward to bring together their wastewater and their water systems so that they work in harmony and unison to support the goals and the objectives of both entities. I would point out that this collaboration and cooperation and now combining of these two departments was done as a result of a piece of legislation that was tabled and debated in this House in the spring. Since that time, the Water Commission itself and the municipality have been able to work through a lot of the circumstances that saw that combining of those two resources. This particular piece of legislation provides in it one additional measure that wasn't in the original bill, and that is Clause 19, that enables the Water Commission to apply the same rules and principles for water that they now use for water, for wastewater, and that is the opportunity to utilize the Public Utility Act to approve the rates and the charges for wastewater and stormwater, Mr. Speaker. This provides for greater protection for the residents. There is now an entity or a body that will oversee rates. I have great confidence that the Water Commission and its employees will continue to do good work on behalf of the municipality. I would point out, Mr. Speaker, that Halifax Regional Water Commission in and of itself is known nationally and internationally as a top provider and producer of clean drinking water. The combination of the employees who have now moved over from Halifax Regional Municipality wastewater and stormwater systems into the municipality will enable seamless service to homeowners and to developers, will provide for, as I earlier indicated, greater protection for rate setting for the citizens, and I'm sure we'll see the continued advancement of more services to communities that currently don't have water and wastewater, and we'll also see, Mr. Speaker, an improvement to the overall system. So with those few words, I'm very pleased, and our caucus is pleased, to support Bill number 83, the Halifax Regional Water Commission Act, Mr. Speaker.
I will recognize the honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park to end debate.
Yes, thank you very much. As I say, I appreciate the comments from the minister on this bill, and I think it is worth repeating that the Halifax Regional Water Commission has a very fine reputation, very professional organization that's well run and has done an excellent job with the Water Commission responsibilities, and I believe they will do very well for the citizens of Halifax and HRM as they go forward with this new mandate. And with that, I would like to close debate and move second reading of Bill 83.
Is the host ready for the question? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried.
Bill 83, entitled an act respecting the Halifax Regional Water Commission.
Order that this bill be referred to the Committee on Private and Local Bills. The Honourable the Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would you please call public bills for third reading?
Public bills for third reading.
The Dental Hygienist Act.
Bill number 24, the Dental Hygienist Act. The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much for allowing me the time to quickly stand and move third reading of the Bill number 24, the Dental Hygienist Act. Again, I just a few moments ago introduced people that were in our gallery to see this bill through. Mr. Speaker, through the Nova Scotia Dental Hygienists Association and through the individuals that we have, excluding Sue McIntosh, who could not join us today, have been working on this college, this idea to have a self-regulated profession in dental hygiene for approximately 27 years. And they have worked through successive governments, successive ministers to get it. They are a very, very patient group. The last push, of course, started in 1994 and moved through a couple of governments and another batch of ministers to make it to this day. Mr. Speaker, I'm very happy to have been the minister to bring this one forward. And Mr. Speaker, this is a very, very, very well-researched bill. This one has been well drafted, and I know the regulations that are coming forward to go along with this bill will be done as speedily as possible to make sure that the dental hygienists can move on with the next level of their profession to be there for the oral health of all Nova Scotians. Mr. Speaker, quickly, this does provide better access, we believe, to Nova Scotians. This will provide better access to oral health care, especially in my mind for our seniors, as dental hygienists would be able to work outside the traditional dentist office or public health office or what have you, to bring their services to seniors in homes, our handicapped individuals to their houses and their homes, and to those individuals who do have difficulty in going out and going to a to a dental office to receive that care, that the dental hygienist would be able to provide that kind of service. So, Mr. Speaker, again, I thank the Nova Scotia Dental Hygienists Association for their perseverance in this one, and I'm very proud to move third reading of Bill number 24, an act respecting dental hygiene.
The Honourable, the member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I too wanted to stand and have a few words on this bill on third reading, Mr. Speaker. I know I've stood a few times now in my place to talk about the need for such an act and the importance that the government needs to recognize the role dental hygienists can play here in Nova Scotia in delivering oral health to not only everyday Nova Scotians, but to those I think most vulnerable here in the province, Mr. Speaker. I must say that with the minister's comments on perseverance, they have been at this for a very long time, Mr. Speaker. The minister mentioned 27 years. 8 of those years under his government's ruling here in the province, Mr. Speaker, and it just shows that, thank heavens, that they didn't give up, Mr. Speaker, because who knows how long we would have been waiting to see this go through the procedures, Mr. Speaker. But I want to mention, Mr. Speaker, the importance of not only third reading of this piece of legislation, but the importance to recognize that you have to have a quicker response when it comes to creating the regulations that have to go hand in hand with this legislation, Mr. Speaker. I know that dental hygienists have worked hard and are working hard currently to come up with those regulations, but I got to say, Mr. Speaker, that this government doesn't have a good track record when it comes to creating those regulations, Mr. Speaker. And for example, Mr. Speaker, the College of Paramedics here in this province, Mr. Speaker, the paramedics of this province have been advocating for years about the creation of a college here in Nova Scotia, and I was pleased to be a member to see that go through this House, Mr. Speaker, in the process. But we're still waiting today. Paramedics are still waiting in this province to have regulations to go in hand with the passing of that legislation, and I wouldn't want to see that happen, Mr. Speaker, to the dental hygienists and this act that we have before us today. I mean, we're looking at 4 years nearly, Mr. Speaker, has passed since the Paramedic Act was proclaimed through the process here in the House, Mr. Speaker. So I need to emphasize that, you know, in order for this to proceed and in order for the dental hygienist to play an important role in delivering oral health care in the province, we need to have those regulations, and it can't happen years down the road, Mr. Speaker. It needs to happen quite quickly after this, Mr. Speaker. So I would like to thank many of those who have spent, as the minister said, 27 years or the last few years informing me as health critic for the NDP caucus around the need for this, Mr. Speaker. I know the minister mentioned the people in the gallery, but I believe one person not in the gallery is Sue McIntosh, who have played an important role. I believe is from Pictou County area, who I have met with on many occasions, Mr. Speaker, and I have to say it again, that they've shown themselves in such a professional manner throughout this whole process, when it would have been easy for them, Mr. Speaker, to just give up and go away and forget about the idea of having a self-regulating body to oversee their practice and the expanded scope of practice that they want to deliver and provide Nova Scotians here in this province. As I said, Mr. Speaker, I hope with this legislation will provide a service to those gaps or those individuals who fall into gaps when it comes to obtaining dental care here in this province, Mr. Speaker. And I was pleased to see them again, the dental hygienists, appear before law amendments to say how important this is to them, and also to have the Dental Association there not making any recommendations or criticizing the legislation, Mr. Speaker, but really ultimately showing up and giving their support to the dental hygienists and the Dental Hygienists Association of this province. So again, Mr. Speaker, I can't emphasize enough that I hope that the regulations will come and marry up with this legislation in a timely manner so that the hygienists in Nova Scotia can proceed, which I think is the most important thing we need to have happen with this legislation, Mr. Speaker. And with those few words, I'll take my seat.
The Honourable, the member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to have the opportunity to say a few words on Bill 24. First of all, Mr. Speaker, I want to congratulate the Nova Scotia Dental Hygienists Association for all their hard work and determination to see this act come forward. The Minister of Health indicated they've been working at this for the last 27 years. I know, Mr. Speaker, the association has been working very hard and a very long time to achieve self-governance for their association. I also know that the association has been working extremely hard for the last 5 years to try to get the government to introduce this piece of legislation. I recall, Mr. Speaker, meeting many times to discuss this act with my next-door neighbour, Bernice Doucette. She's a past president of the Nova Scotia Dental Hygienists Association. I know meeting with Bernice, and we talked about Sue McIntosh. I recall in the last number of years meeting with both of them on several occasions to try to move this bill forward. I know that the association has been working extremely hard for these healthcare professionals, and so today I'm quite pleased to see that they are finally receiving the recognition for all their hard work. Mr. Speaker, this recognition, of course, has taken way too long to achieve. I understand also that about 92% of the dental hygienists in Canada are self-governed. I also understand that our dental hygienists here in Nova Scotia will be the first in Atlantic Canada to receive and to achieve self-governance. Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotia was one of the first province in Canada to allow self-governing legislation for many different professional groups. And so far, many professional groups here in Nova Scotia now have self-governance. So again, Mr. Speaker, it's a shame it took so long for the hygienists to be recognized. And finally today, the dental hygienists in Nova Scotia are receiving the recognition they deserve. So with that, Mr. Speaker, in closing, I want to thank the government for finally having agreed to table this piece of legislation and moving debate on this piece of legislation to allow it to go through this House. So, Mr. Speaker, I'll close with this. I hope that the government will act quickly upon these regulations. I hope, again, that the dental hygienists won't have to wait long or as long for the regulations to come forward as they've waited for this bill to come forward. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I will take my seat. Thank you.
The Honourable, the member for Pictou East.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm very pleased to take my place in this House and speak in favor of Bill number 24. Bill number 24 has been a long, long time coming, and we've heard 27 years, we've heard 24 years, we've heard the minister say 1994, and we know that it has taken, from my knowledge, a good 8 years from the people that I have been dealing with. It's like pulling teeth. So, Mr. Speaker, first I want to pay tribute to the dental hygienists who had the fortitude to stay at this for so many years. And in particular, I would like to mention a constituent of mine, Sue McIntosh, who has been working diligently for a long time at the provincial and the national levels to try to get better situations in place, both provincially and nationally, for dental hygienists. And I believe that Sue McIntosh would be with us today, but there was a death in her family, and I would like to pay tribute to her father-in-law, who passed away last week, who was a Supreme Court judge here in Nova Scotia, a great Nova Scotian, a great Canadian, Alec Dooley McIntosh, who was the mayor of New Glasgow when I was a very young teenage news reporter at CKEC in New Glasgow. And I have so many fond memories of Alec McIntosh, Sue's father-in-law. Now, I am pleased that this government, after 8 years in office, has finally come to the conclusion that it is important to recognize the dental hygienists in this way. So I want to commend the current minister, who has in fact been able to do what his predecessors have not been able to do, and the fact that this is at the stage of third reading. So I do give him a bouquet for the action that has finally taken place, So the current member does deserve some praise for that. Now, through this bill, dental hygienists will continue, for the most part, to work in dentists' offices, and there will be the bond that has existed between dentists and dental hygienists for many, many years. However, the big change is the fact that the dentists are no longer the gatekeepers of the dental hygienists, and that is a major accomplishment. Dental hygienists will be able to go out and do some of the great services that they provide on their own. And this is something that has been so long coming, but that gatekeeper status is no longer there. Now, Mr. Speaker, one of the things that I would like to talk about is the fact that the demographics in relationship to dental hygienists. Just a few months ago, we were looking at numbers of approximately 600 dental hygienists in this province. 600. And it's my understanding that 594 of those were female and 4 of them were male. And I have to wonder aloud, Mr. Speaker, whether if it had have been numbers that were reversed, whether if the numbers were skewed the opposite way, I wonder, Mr. Speaker, if it would have taken all these years for this to come about. Mr. Speaker, the House will be a better House when 50% of the occupants of these seats are female. And there is only one party that is moving in that direction, and with the election of the member for Eastern Passage Cole Harbour, this party has at least reached 30%. 30%. And we are on our way, the only party that is showing mobility, upward mobility in relationship to gender equality. Now, Mr. Speaker, I just want to make the point, Mr. Speaker, that the Liberal Party, or the third party in the House, is stagnated at 11%.
Order, please. Order, please. Order, please. Order, please. First of all, there's way too much noise in the chamber, and I would ask the honourable member to return back to the third reading of the bill that's before the House, please.
Thank you very much, Speaker. I thought I was, in fact, dealing with that in relationship to the demographics of dental hygienists. However, I will leave that. I will leave that. It was just a thought that came to me, Mr. Speaker, as I was on my feet. Mr. Speaker, I'm very concerned that the regulations go into place as quickly as possible, and certainly when we look at the paramedics and so on, we want to ensure that every time there is a bill before this House and it does receive royal assent, we would always hope that it would be a very short time frame in which we would be dealing with an issue, and that the regulations would be in place very, very quickly. Mr. Speaker, I do want to say that I commend all of those, and on a very serious note, I do commend the current minister, and I do commend all of those who worked so diligently to bring this piece of legislation to third reading. And I will not belabor this situation. We are at a milestone with it, and on that note, I will take my seat, and I congratulate all who were able to bring this about. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Is he up? The Honourable, the member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I agree with most of the comments from my honourable colleague from Pictou East. There was a time perhaps I would have been inclined to teach him a lesson at this point. But Mr. Speaker, now is not the time or the place to do that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, let me just say very briefly, because I've made most of my points on this bill at second reading, and Bill number 24 is of course a bill whose time has come. I want to mention one group in particular, and that would be the staff and the people, the minister's staff from the Department of Health, who have done a tremendous amount of work on this legislation over the years, and have been there from the very beginning, and have been through some rather trying times. It did take a while, but we're finally there. In particular, one staff member, a former staff member, who's no longer with the minister, a policy advisor, Bobby Sutherland, who has moved on to work with Nova Scotia Power, who put a lot of time and effort into this legislation. So I want to make sure that we congratulate them. And I do want to congratulate the minister. This is a piece of legislation that, as I said, is important. It's going to do good for this province, and as the most important part of it is that it will provide access to care for people in this province. So having said that, Mr. Speaker, I congratulate the minister, his staff, and everyone involved with this bill for a fine piece of legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. The Honourable, the Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure this evening to join in the debate on Bill number 24, an act respecting dental hygienists in this province. I realize that every time you are here in the House during the debate, you learn something from the other members when they get up to speak. And And I want to say I do admire the restraint of the MLA from Glace Bay. It's not always thus and so, but it was good to see this evening. It's the season. He's feeling generous. But the reality is the member from Pictou East, I thought, made a number of very good points, among them the fact that this piece of legislation has a significant impact on 600 people in this province who are engaged in the profession of dental hygiene and more importantly, on all the people who are their patients, who they come into contact with, who they provide a service to. And it has been my pleasure over the years to get to know a good number of these people. And certainly Sue McIntosh's name has come up time and time again. And she's been congratulated on the work that she's done. And in fact, the House has acknowledged again and again the tremendous patience with which the dental hygienists approach this matter. And I think any one of the members who have been in this House any period of time would agree. I think we've all had meetings in our constituency office with dental hygienists who are from our particular areas. They adopted a strategy to make sure that and I thought a very good one, that each MLA understood that there were actually people in their constituencies who were watching the work that was being done and who were prepared to come to their offices and talk to you about the importance of that legislation. And I was impressed, Mr. Speaker, particularly with the aspects associated with this effort that were associated with the seniors population. And Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but certainly over the years, either when I was on City Council or in this job, I've represented seniors, many seniors organizations, many seniors facilities, many housing units where the access to this kind of service will be of tremendous benefit to those individuals. And I know that there had been some concerns that had been raised with respect to the scope of practice that dental hygienists were incorporating. And I think the point that was made over and over again, which was a very good one, is that the access to this service by people who may not now have the ability or have even the funds to transport themselves to a dentist, or may not have a dental plan, or may not have the money to regularly visit dentists, that this legislation will help identify early on those people who may have real oral health problems that otherwise would go undiagnosed, would otherwise not maybe come to the attention of the individual until it was a very serious problem. So this is an aspect of the extension of this practice that I don't think was mentioned earlier in the debate on the bill, but it is one of the points that was made, certainly to me, by the people, by the dental hygienists who either sought to meet with me in my position as the Leader of the Opposition, or who met me simply as the MLA for the constituency of Cole Harbour. So I certainly I certainly took all those representations seriously. I certainly committed a number of years ago to try and do anything I could to help this process along, and we have made our opinion with respect to this known to the various ministers of health over the years, of which I think there are 3 right now sitting on the front bench of the government side. Mr. Speaker, I would point out that there are other groups that seek the similar kinds of self-governance models, and that this one is one that is I think relatively common to some of the other professions that we have seen come before the House, and I know that the paramedics are out there looking for a similar kind of self-governance model that they would like to engage government on, and that they've been talking with the Department of Health, and I assume with the Minister and with others, about the importance of that kind of regulation. And of course, Mr. Speaker, as a member of the Bar Society, I have been a member of a self-regulating profession for many years. So, Mr. Speaker, I think that it is a tribute to the tenacity of the dental hygienists to see this bill here. I wanted to, in addition to my colleagues, to extend to them my congratulations on the hard work that they've done to get this bill here. I know that the time is running out, and that the Minister will want to have a few minutes to close debate on the bill. So I am going to sit down, but I did want to take the time to put on record an acknowledgement of what I think is the hard work that's been done here. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to take my seat. Thank you.
Thank you. The Honourable, the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And quickly, I want to thank the members opposite for their interventions in this and their comments, and I thank them for their input and their support of this bill. Mr. Speaker, if we speak to those who have helped along the way, I do want to send as well the thanks to people like Bob Fitzner, who work, of course, in our department, Dennis Holland, Sarah Gorlick, and individuals like that who have been working on this file, I think probably as long as they've been in the department. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to again thank the Nova Scotia Dental Hygienists Association for their perseverance again on this one, their support on this one. And Mr. Speaker, you know, this one did take consensus from all sides, and I do believe it was important to have consensus for those individuals and those organizations who are committed to good oral health care. And of course, I want to thank the Nova Scotia Dental Association for their support of this one as well. So with those short words, after 27 years, I move third reading of the Bill number 24, an act respecting dental hygienists.
Thank you. The motion is for third reading on Bill number 24. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Against? Motion carried.
Bill 24, entitled an act respecting dental hygienists.
Order that this bill do pass, or that the title be as read by the clerk, or that the bill be engrossed. The Honourable, the Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would you please call Bill number 31, the Medical Act?
Bill number 31. The Honourable, the Minister of Health.
I'll be even shorter on this one. Mr. Speaker, I call for third reading of Bill number 31, the Medical Act.
Bill number 31. Are there any speakers? Question has been called. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favour of third reading on Bill number 31, please say aye. Aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion carried.
Bill 31, entitled an act to amend Chapter 10 of the Acts of 1995-96, the Medical Act.
Order that this bill do pass, order that the title be as read by the clerk, order that this bill be engrossed. The Honourable, the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to seek the consent of the House to reverse the order of business to the presenting reports of committees.
Is it agreed? Agreed.
Thank you very much.
The Honourable, the Government House Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and all members of the House. Mr. Speaker, as Chairman of the Committee on Law Amendments, I'm directed to report that the committee has met and considered the following bills. Bill number 19, an act respecting class proceedings. Bill number 55, an act to amend Chapter 377 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Public Service Superannuation Act. The committee recommends these bills to the favourable consideration of the House without amendment.
Or that these bills be read on a third time on a future date. The Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. As Chairman of the Committee on Law Amendments, I'm directed to report that the committee has met and considered the following bills. Bill number 6, an act to amend Chapter 12 of the Acts of 2002, the Smoke-Free Places Act. Bill number 51, an act to amend Chapter 1 of the Acts of 1995-96, the Education Act. Bill number 72, an act respecting the designated day closing of retail businesses. The committee recommends these bills to the favorable consideration of the House with certain amendments.
Thank you. Or that these bills be referred to the Committee of the Whole House on Bills. The Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And given the hour, are you going to break now, or do you want to carry on with the government business? Carry on with government business. We will call Bill number 45, public bills for third reading, please.
Bill number 45 for third reading. The Honourable the Minister responsible for Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Mr. Speaker, I am delighted to move that the Companies Act, the bill entitled the Company Act, Bill number 45, now be read for the third time.